communication?
Communicate.
What is the value of healthy communication in a relationship, Amanda Bucci? How does one develop their communication?
Going right into it.
Yeah.
The value of healthy communication. Here we are.
Here we are.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
The value is being able to get your wants, needs, and desires actually met instead of pretending you don't have them and being regularly dissatisfied or resentful or angry or sad or frustrated. And being able to communicate with someone else is basically like finding out what that other person's language is and then having them find out what your language is and finding a way to meet in the middle and really like actually understanding the full scope of what that person's working with, right? Like we've all got these different ways of being and not everybody even treats certain words the same way. Like we all grow up with different interpretations of what we want, what we need, what we think the world is like, what we expect of other people. And usually all that information is just sitting on the inside of our brains and our hearts and our bodies. And very often we don't even know what's there. We often have feelings and sometimes we have very clearly defined opinions and structures and belief systems and desires. And we have clarity about who we are and what we want and what we need. But often we just have feelings and we interact with other people and they do something that we don't expect or we do something that they don't expect and there's emotions that happen. And if we don't know how to communicate our emotions and we don't know how to communicate what's going on the inside, then we're really interacting with each other's like masks and personas and we're not really interacting with the fullness of what's available. And when you learn how to do that and you can communicate, hey, I am feeling this, this, and this. I'm still a little confused about how I feel, but this is what I do know and this is what I want to share with you. And this is what I'm feeling I'm not receiving. This is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm looking for. And if you can have a good conversation to find a way to meet in the middle, then the value of that is to me personally priceless. Very high value.
That's so beautiful.
Thanks.
I was reading about Jung, psychoanalysis and stuff. And one of the things in the process of individuation, like coming into yourself, each human is born into what they call an acquired self. And you grow up in this conventional world and you kind of acquire yourself based off of your lineage and the environment that you grow up in and who you think you are. And then there's the process of individuation where you eventually come into a more authentic expression of yourself. But it seems like having the courage to, I think for many people, release the shame to actually feel empowered to allow like your inner light shine or whatever kind of fluffy language you put on it.
Yeah.
It's like a whole process.
It's a lot.
How do you do that? What we got to do? If you're feeling like, God damn, I don't feel really fully authentic. I feel like a little constricted. I feel like I'm like 80% authentic. But there's that 20% that I'm not quite sure my partner's ready to see or I'm ready to come into acceptance with or the world's ready. If it's a social media conversation, which we'll talk about, your most recent book followed your first book and most recent book.
First book and most recent.
First and most recent. Yeah, how does a person garner that extra, squeeze out that extra 20% of authenticity and have the courage to do so?
Yeah, the courage. I like to call it living on the edge. Right? Like if you're talking about that 80%, which I really liked that to kind of start off and jump off with, you can feel what lives on the other side of that 80%, that 20%, by feeling into your personal edges. The thing that you feel when you bump up against it, you're like, that's something that feels like cringy or it feels scary or it feels like you're not ready to bring that out of what lives in your body into the outside world yet. Like you said, sometimes you're not even ready to face it yourself. But oftentimes you'll find that there's patterns that you have of behavior that you're not really proud of, or there's some other kind of like manifestation or physical symptom, whether it's like in your physical body or in your relationships or in your business or in something that you're doing in the outside world that you're not super happy about. You want to change it. And if you're feeling into those areas and you're feeling that sense of there's an edge here, that's something that I am not fully ready to look at, it's almost like taking that small micro moment and recognizing that there's something there that you want more of is really the first step. It's deciding to look. It's deciding to look where those edges actually are, that kind of cringy, scary feeling of maybe there's something here that I want to communicate, that I want to be open about, that I want to explore within myself. But what's my resistance to that? So that's the edgy piece. It's like the resistance, the fear, the doubt, the patterns, the potential trauma that lives in that edge is all like your next growth journey. So we're all on these little growth journeys, and we find our edges. If you're in this like path of finding more authenticity in your life, which I love talking about, it's like, what are the little edges that you can lean into and start to unpack? What are the resistances that I'm feeling to actually expressing this part of me?
Where are your edges at these days, or historically speaking?
Where are my edges at?
Yeah. What's an edge? What's a present edge?
That's a really interesting question. I haven't thought of that lately. What's something that's an edge for me right now? I've done so much work around it in the last couple of years. Like I've talked about being polyamorous on social media for the last 3.5, 4 years or so. And that's been a huge edge for me to like publicly and privately explore my relational identity and my sexual identity and, who I am in that kind of space. And I've done so much work. Like it's my work in the world as a person to help other people unpack their authenticity and their edges. So what is going on with me right now that feels kind of like an edge?
Come on.
That's a good question. I'm kind of coasting right now in terms of like what I've been working on, which is good. I think sometimes we got to like let everything that we've done settle.
What's the last thing that's made you go?
Yeah. Recently I just really, really worked on a lot of my relationship to my business and money stuff. And so, I had an edgy emotional experience around being seen to not know what I'm doing. And I really take this authenticity path pretty seriously. And that sometimes looks like doing things that don't look outwardly successful. So I have like canceled hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of money in my business in the last couple of years, multiple times over, for the sake of like more authenticity, my kind of deeper creative callings that were feeling more important than sticking with something that was consistent. And I had to do so much work around dismantling the identity of like a 7-figure entrepreneur that does these big things and has this type of success and being seen to be that type of person in that kind of box, and then letting a lot of those things go in the way that people expected them to look within my brand or within what I was doing. And I really let myself be in this kind of discovery process again, because I had a lot more that I wanted to say. I had a lot that I was navigating and going through as a person. And it's really difficult, which is like what I talk about in Followed, to be witnessed in your journey of figuring yourself out. Because it very often, if you really are doing that and you're really like leaning into your edges, it very often kind of requires you to look at, or to just be in this student position and to be in this like I am still learning things position, which on a deeper level requires you to release a lot of shame about anything that you're conditioned to believe is wrong or bad or not enough or not good enough, or anything that lives in this kind of space of being seen to be this feels really scary to me, because I don't feel like that's okay, because I either have like a conditioned belief or like that adopted self version of me, acquired self version of me thinks that it's not okay to be this way. But ultimately, the whole part of the journey of being a human is finding that so many ways of being are actually deeply acceptable. So
the last time I had a cringe moment was when you identified with like the 7-figure entrepreneur person. Yes. My whole body was like,
yeah. I mean, that's a cringe in and of itself after you're like, okay, we don't need to identify as that.
Like, love 7 figures, love 20 figures, whatever.
Cool.
But great. But the identification with this like relic of a story that I will be worthy, I think, ultimately of love when I arrive in this container. And therefore inherently I'm not now.
Right.
And
100%.
I think that that's the part where I'm just like, oh, it sounds so sad.
It was sad. It was. And I've moved past it now, which I'm really grateful for. But it was it's so interesting to feel something that was used to be such a big cringe, such a big, like, I don't feel okay to not be seen as this successful person that is in this certain box of success. And now I'm like, great, I've moved past that. I don't believe that anymore. But it took a lot of work to do that. And I had to really face myself and face that cringy feeling on the inside.
So who are you without the titles?
I'm just a person going through life and trying to be happy.
Just vibing. Just
vibing. Correct. Now I'm just vibing happily and like primarily focusing on with whatever my work is whatever makes me the most happy and feels the most authentic. And money is like this, it doesn't have to represent anything that equals my value. It's something that I'm excited to have and create and all of that stuff that it can help you create, but it doesn't mean the same thing that it once did before in terms of being related to my worth.
How does the way that a person shows up on social media relate to the way that they show up in their actual organic life?
Yeah, it's a great thought experiment because I talk about this and followed quite a bit. And it was really like the core of why I wanted to create this book is your relationship to social media is really a great mirror and a reflection for your relationship to yourself. Because when you are coming onto social media and you're figuring out a brand, what you're basically doing is you're extracting information and you're also extracting which parts of your personality you feel comfortable to share with strangers who ultimately at the end of the day don't know you. You're not in an intimate one-on-one relationship with them where like you can trust their judgment and you can trust that they're going to like hold you with love and compassion and like witness you in a way that helps you feel safe and comfortable. Very often, strangers on the internet will do the opposite of that and they will witness you in a way that makes you feel very uncomfortable. So often when we decide which parts of us we're going to post online, it's usually the most marketable, likable, acceptable versions of us that, yes, are also like related to our brands and the businesses that we're building and, really are driven by that experience first and foremost for most people. But also if you're starting to share more personal stories or if you're even just like finding out how to be authentic through your business and bring your creative self or your musical self or your sexuality and stuff online and you're doing that, it's really this process of getting comfortable enough within yourself to bring things into a space full of strangers who you don't know how they're going to react to you. So I love seeing people on social media be self-expressed and share things shamelessly and unapologetically because I'm like, cool, like you did enough work on yourself to be unapologetically authentic in who you are.
What about sharing? How much is too much? Is there any such thing? Obviously, it's an incredibly individual thing. But I wonder, so something that I see in the social media schema or world is kind of like forced vulnerability.
Yes, totally.
Or like, oh, I think it's trending to share about my polyamory or share about my whatever. Shame. I have shame. I'm ashamed. Oh, I'm ashamed.
Yes.
I'm crying. There's image of me crying.
Yeah.
Get the phone. I get the light. I'm crying. Got it? Okay.
So what's the difference? What's the difference for you? I have a question for you because it sounds like you've got a little judgment, perhaps. Oh, yeah. And I'll answer your question.
Well,
too.
There's different iterations of it. There's like that would be like the quote unquote maybe shadow side of that.
Yeah, like
and then
what
there's
is
also
it?
Maybe just a really beautiful expression of like, wow, this is just a really authentic moment, and I want to be a symbol of maybe offering the invitation for greater liberation for someone else. And typically, instead of it just being a highlight reel, here's a moment of me having this. And there's also, I'm trying to garner wins or points based off of this like artificial vulnerability, which is like fucking gross. Yeah.
And you can usually feel that within yourself if that's what's happening for you of like.
It's kind of psychopathic.
Correct.
Like kind of, I mean, completely fucking psychopathic.
I really don't like this.
Can we breed
this
psychopathy?
This is not for Aaron Alexander.
I'm all ruffled.
Do not fake cry.
I'm ruffled
Instagram.
up, Bucci.
I feel you though. When I did research for this book like a couple years ago with my audience, and I asked them what was the thing that they really struggled with the most about social media. And the content creators said that they really struggled with this feeling of not knowing how to be fully authentic, or struggling with like it might not be okay to be authentic, and like whatever that means to them. And then the people that were less so content creators and just consumers, they hated that fake performative authenticity. They hate like sensing it in people that they're just doing something for followers or for marketing or whatever. And I think people are more like attuned to that than ever before. I think people can like sniff it out real quick, and you can feel when someone is doing something as like a performance. And I think that it's such a personal journey to really notice like when am I doing something that is a bit of a performance, because we're all kind of performing even just a little bit. Like even on this podcast, like we're not talking the way that we would talk if we were in a coffee shop. We're very, very close to it because we're both very authentic people.
Pretty close.
But like our tone of voice is a little louder or whatever, right? We're sitting crisscross, we would do this.
That's true.
So we're pretty authentic people. Our conversation's going to be pretty authentic, but it's just like a little notch up.
Yeah.
Right? And some people it's different. Like if you're less comfortable with yourself and you feel as though it's only okay, or you're only going to be liked, or you're only going to get followers, or even if there's a part of you that's like, I think people are going to hate if I say it this way or share this part of my story. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm kind of controlling the narrative. I'm like organizing what I want my brand to look like, but we all do that. So what's the line, you ask, between that performative vulnerability and authentic vulnerability where you're really sharing? I think on a personal level for me, and what I found with a lot of people that I talk to, is being able to get to a point in your own personal process with your share where you recognize, I'm sharing this because number one, I have like worked on integrating this part of myself to feel comfortable with me. I feel comfortable enough with this part of me because I've done personal work on it, whether it's like, again, your sexuality, or like a story that feels a little cringy because you feel like there's something with your self-worth there, or, even what you eat, or you've changed your diet. Like I've talked to people that have been vegan online for years and like they had to change their diet to, something that wasn't vegan. It's really scary because people are going to attack them or whatever. I think you get to work on, number one, the first layer, getting comfortable with yourself. Number two, being comfortable with being seen, judged, and criticized, and like having enough support in your life, having enough support within yourself to know that if it's a topic or like something that might be touchy for other people that don't know you, that don't have the context, or that just aren't really ready to like lovingly and compassionately meet you in your share, you will be okay. And also, finally, the third level is that there's something in it for the other people that you're bringing it to. And I think that having those first two layers really kind of down pat before you share something, and then also really recognizing like, and I'm doing this because people are, watching because they're looking to get something out of this as well. And like, yes, they follow me for me, but they're also here to better their own lives, and they're, following for whatever content I create too.
Yeah, I think that's something that, not that I'm any level of social media expert in any capacity, but that's something that, one thing that I think about before posting some shit on the internet is this of value to someone, or am I exclusively selfishly posting this for my own gain? Right. And I think if it's the latter, it's kind of dirty.
Yeah, totally.
It's just gross.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that where this conversation is interesting is I think the how it's analogous for how one conducts himself in their life. So if you can live your life in such a way of just having that awareness of like, how am I like cleaning the room up a little bit? How am I making everyone's experience in the room like a little bit better? Yeah. Including my own. And that's where it can also get a little dirty as well, is where I'm just thinking about other people's experiences. Right. At the expense of my own. Yeah, like you're martyring yourself for other people. Which then comes back into the shame piece. Yes. Like, do I deserve to feel good? Do I deserve to express authentically or have this opinion? So it's that balance in there. how does a person start to acknowledge and address shame within themselves? I'd like by the end of this conversation for there to be a guidebook on
shame.
Expelling any tendrils of shame that may be sitting, festering someplace inside your situation.
Mm-hmm.
How do we kind of get through there and purge out the shame?
Yeah.
If there is any.
If there's any guidebook.
If there's any shame.
If there's any shame. There's almost always
what
shame.
What a bummer it is to be to hold shame just for being.
We've all got that. It's crazy.
Oh yeah.
I think that's one of the main human experience, journey things that we all navigate is how do I...
We're all united in shame.
I mean, yeah. How do I be okay with just existing as myself, naturally?
Is that okay?
I mean, I think it... yes, and... There's always a yes and. Of course, it's, there's going to be that balance of having, compassion for yourself. So we'll get into the shame and how to navigate through that and how to clear out the tendrils of the shame that live in your body. And there's also that part that's yes, there are shadowy parts of yourself that often manifest in behaviors that you don't want to keep, or things that hurt you or hurt other people, or things that you're recognizing okay, yes, I am okay to exist as I am. And what's the line between existing as I am and I want to grow through this? But it's really interesting because the moment that you start resisting a part of yourself
gets powerful
is the moment that it gets really powerful and it has power over you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the shadow, if you will, is anything that you've rejected internally, unconsciously, or consciously. You've rejected, thought, believed that it's bad or wrong. Someone else told you that it's bad or wrong to have this, or you've de-identified as that's not a part of who I am, or I could never do that. And ultimately, being able to look into where you feel shame is being able to go to those places of, for example, it's not okay to rest. It's bad if I rest. I should be productive.
I'm busy, full schedule.
Right?
No time.
Mm-mm. And it's a really interesting thing because it's so important for us to rest. And if you even look at nature, there are seasons where there's more rest and there's more rejuvenation. And nature has its own very natural cycles. And having this belief system that it's not okay for you to rest and you're more bad, or you're more lazy, or you're not a productive member of society and you're less valuable, or your time is of lower value if you're using it for rest and rejuvenation, is really ridiculous if you think about it. Rest is so important for our bodies. It's one of the ways that we rejuvenate our cells and be able to continue existing and be vital, is being able to have a well-rested body. It's one of the ways that our organs function properly. I'm sure you know more about this than I do in terms of the science behind it, but it's so funny that we believe something like that, right? But it's one of the most deep belief systems that our society has, especially Americans, right? Europeans are yeah, we have siestas in the middle of the day and we don't open stuff until 10 a.m. and they got rest down, but we don't over here. Yeah,
the belief that you deserve the spaciousness to rest, I think, is a very deeply inculcated belief system in me, for example, but I imagine a lot of other people as well.
Yeah.
And if you really actually are still enough to kind of be with yourself in that way, it's do you feel like you actually deserve just to comes back to deserve just to be?
Right. Exactly.
I wanted to read the thing that you already know that I want to read. It's something I got from your book. It's from Deborah Ford, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. Is it okay if I read that? Is that annoying?
No, please do. I like that one.
Is it good one? These treasures, this is about shame stuff again, and then we'll come off the shame in a minute. I want to talk about polyamory if you're open to it.
Yes. Shame and polyamory.
All comes back to communication.
Communicate.
Wait,
have you seen the Barbie movie?
No.
So there's a part in it where Ken, he says, my job is beach.
Nice.
Not a lifeguard. His job is just beach.
Nice.
So when we said communicate at the beginning, it reminded me of that.
I love that.
Communicate.
I resonate.
Beach.
Yeah, I resonate with that. All right.
You should watch it.
These treasures tried desperately to emerge, to come to our attention, but we are conditioned to push them back down. Like giant beach balls being held underwater, these aspects pop back up to the surface whenever we take the pressure off. By choosing not to allow parts of ourselves to exist, we are forced to expend a huge amount of psychic energy to keep them beneath the surface. I think that's an interesting thing, like how, and eventually we'll transition away from the shame stuff, but the various different beach balls of some form of like lack of acceptance within ourselves that we try our damnedest to keep beneath the surface, and it just acts as that. It has a returning force back up, and the harder you push it down, the more kind of squibbly it gets. And the amount of energy that a person expends on just trying to be the idea of who they think they're supposed to be throughout the day, like the journey to come, that is the process of the individuated self, like a la Jung, or the hero's journey, a la Joseph Campbell, which is stemming off of Jung stuff, is like coming into that place of feeling like you are worthy of resting.
Yeah.
You don't need to hold the beach ball. It's like we're just, and when you're around a person like that, it's incredibly magnetic. And suddenly it opens up all your desires and all the things that you thought you deserved, or maybe you thought you didn't deserve.
Yeah. Or maybe you get triggered by them.
Triggered by whatever the thing is. It's like the world opens up because you've released the pressure and you've created space. But it's simultaneously, kind of paradoxically, it can be terrifying to actually come into that place of self-acceptance enough to be like, I don't need to hold these fucking beach balls.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm just let them go.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the things that I've found that people are most terrified of is ultimately that they can't handle the feeling that is ultimately being avoided when they face that shame. Because it can be a really yucky feeling. I don't know if you've ever had a somatic release experience related to shame, but I have. And sometimes I've had a couple of somatic releases when I was really processing some shame. And I was almost vomiting. It just felt like this really yucky energy. And if you've ever even had an experience where you've noticed that you were avoiding an emotion, or there was that lump in your throat that you pushed it down, it's usually this subconscious feeling of I can't handle whatever will happen when I actually face this emotion. I don't know if I can handle it. And I've found that learning how to really support yourself and be supported in your deepest emotions is really impactful, whether you have relationships in your life that can just be next to you and witness you when you're in that, or if you have a relationship with yourself where you've learned how to regulate your emotions, or just literally compassionately be with whatever is present, is one of the most powerful things that you can do to support that energy moving up and out. Like you said, the beach balls in the quote, it's all of the emotional energy ultimately wants to come up and out. And in that up and out process, it can feel so weird and intense and painful. And sometimes it can be really a lot to do it. But if you can have a compassionate perspective on yourself of this is okay, I'm okay, I am going to be with this part of me as lovingly as I possibly can. There's another person here maybe that loves me for who I am, and I feel comfortable with them, whether it's an unbiased therapist or someone really, really close to you that can, hold space for you in that process. It transforms people. And it's one of the most difficult things to do. And it sounds somewhat simple as I'm saying it, but if you've ever just taken the actual moment to be all right, I'm going to attempt to sit with whatever I'm scared of and let it exist and feel the energy and the sensations course through my body as I ideally release some of it and let it come up and out. It's really powerful.
Yeah. I'm having this interesting, I'm visualizing this experience of a person holding the beach balls down in a different way. And the amount of individuals that are experiencing chronic fatigue or adrenal issues or sleeplessness or anxiety or depression, or they just got big old hunking bags under their eyes and just zombieing through the world.
Right.
It's interesting. You think of Moshe Feldenkrais has a concept he calls parasitic tension that a person holds. So it's these little parasites that we hold onto in the form of various different compensations that we hold. It's actually you're expending caloric, energetic, psycho-emotional, spiritual energy to maintain these compensatory patterns.
Right. And then it gives you less energy to focus on other things like your dreams and your business and your work or your relationships. And you are essentially stuck in the reality that you're in because you're expending a lot of energy holding down and repressing emotions.
Does a person ever release all their beach balls? Like, is that safe?
Over time. I don't have that many beach balls right now, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Good
It's
for
really
you.
cool. Thanks.
I feel like I've got to have several.
Sure. Yeah. I
just
mean,
assume.
I've done a lot to release a lot of those beach balls. I've dedicated my last like couple years to it.
What could a person?
But it takes time.
What could a person in a monogamous relationship structure learn from a individual that is engaged in a polyamorous relationship structure? We talked about this
Switching
before.
gears here. Yes.
Yeah, we talked about this before, and I think like the velocity of mental, emotional, I don't know, space traveling and the communication necessary to be engaged in something where it's like there's multiple partners involved in a relationship compared to monogamy. I feel like there's probably something that could be extracted and learned from the rest of the normies out there engaged in old monogamy.
Yes.
What could be learned? Pardon the absolutely seamless segue.
We'll just dive right in. What can we learn? I think it's a good segue though, because, you know, speaking into the piece about shame, something I think is really cool about polyamory that I've really, really enjoyed in my relationship experience is some of these areas that I feel like I maybe never would have normally gotten to look at in a monogamous context because there wasn't always availability or like structure or catalyst necessarily to look at some of these things. So typically a lot of people ask in Q&As and stuff about how do you navigate jealousy? Jealousy is just an emotion. It's one of the very normal emotions that we all feel, but in a monogamous context, typically people avoid anything that creates jealousy or insecurity. Especially if you like follow any of the red pill podcasts and stuff. They're like, okay, I need you to be this and this, and you're not allowed to do this, this, and this. It's just like you're avoiding looking at anything that might bring up an insecurity or a jealousy, and you're creating rules and structures that create like, no, this is not allowed. I'm not allowed to feel this. I'm not available to look at this or feel this within myself. So we will create a relationship that makes sure that I don't look at it that way. Not every monogamous person operates that way, obviously. Like there's plenty of people that are open to doing their inner work, and they are doing their inner work in the structure of their monogamous relationship. And there can be so much stuff that gets brought to the table just with two people. If you add any additional person, even if you add the thought of an additional person without actually doing it, it brings up all of these feelings of insecurity, jealousy, potential betrayal, potential abandonment, potential fears and concerns and what ifs. It just brings up all of these like new threads and you know, potential thought spirals to the table of what if. Like anytime someone it's so funny being a person that's polyamorous on the internet. In the very first couple of years, almost everybody would sit and respond back either in a comment or in a conversation. And they would say, like once they found out, I could never. And then they start putting themselves in my position. And then they start to say, this is how I would feel if I were in that scenario. And it's like almost automatic that people put themselves in that position because they start to question, what would I feel like? What would I think about? So some of the benefits, I think that if you talk to any polyamorous people or if you learn from any of us in any kind of way, is really the ability to look in the areas that most people don't want to look. And when you do that in a way that is healthy and structured and you don't, you know, there's so much to learn there, but you don't push it too hard or too far because you can obviously get into some areas that can bring up traumas and insecurities, and self-development and personal development is not a rush. You can't rush your process. Your process is so personal, and you can have, you know, you want to move through things. Like maybe you feel insecure about your body in comparison to your, you know, partner is seeing someone and their body is different than yours. And you're like, this is bringing up stuff about body image. You're not just going to talk about your body image in one conversation and then you're going to feel good about it. It might be like a massive thing for you. It might be something that you've worked on your whole life. It might be too much. So you start to kind of unpack like the texture of what really lives there. And it's another little self-development quest that you go on. And if you have structures in place in your relationship to be able to safely bring up some of those things to the surface and have conversations about them and navigate them in ways that are ultimately like healing, it can be really beneficial. You might have to go through some kind of clunky moments where you don't have great communication and maybe someone goes too fast, and like all of those things are potential things that can happen, and those are things that have happened in my relationship as well. And when you have the right kind of willingness to close those loops of healing and like look at those things and see the potential of healing within them, there's always ways, I think, to get through it.
Is there such a thing as too much honesty in a relationship?
Yeah, I think so.
How much microscopic truth ought be shared in a relationship?
I think if it doesn't actually benefit the other person in any way to hear it, I think it's really, sometimes it's a little too much. Like we can say on the body image thing, for example, like I often think and feel if you communicate with someone about their body and your judgments of it, if you don't like it or if there's something that is challenging for you about it, I don't know how much that ends up helping people versus hurting people. I think that there's always going to be a good question of like, how much is this going to hurt and how much is this going to help? If it's something that feels really true and authentic to you and you can't not say it because it's going to allow you to like live more authentically and expressed if you like bring it to the table, then I think those things are important. But it's really, you got to really sit with like, okay, what is like a thought that I'm just having that isn't going to help the other person? It's going to probably only hurt them. And maybe I don't need to say it to them. Maybe I say it to like my friend, or maybe I say it to someone that it doesn't have any kind of emotional impact or effect on.
Yeah.
Just like those whatever thoughts of like, maybe it's just like that person's hot or whatever, like whatever that is for you. If it's something that, you haven't communicated about of like, hey, can we bring these types of conversations to the table? Or how would you feel if we talked about money? Or how would you feel if we talked about, other people's looks? Or how would you feel if we talked about, food and eating habits and house, like whatever you haven't had conversations about. I think you really got to kind of gauge people's interest in having things shared with them in any relationship.
Yeah. I wonder from your perception, because I'd imagine if you're in a polyamorous dynamic, safety would be very important. Safety in any dynamic is very important. Mm-hmm. You as a female, how would you suggest for men to make their female or whatever, their feminine counterpart feel safe?
Yeah, I think safety, what I've learned is the number one. And it's not always something that I have and my partners have 100% known. Like I think that there's always going to be this dynamic of feeling safe and feeling free that everyone's navigating through. And like Esther Perel's work is really incredible with that. She was like one of the first people that I heard talk about that, and just the dynamic that we're all navigating, like how do I feel safe and how do I feel free? And what I've learned is if there is a chicken or the egg, safety comes first only in that the same thing is like, structure creates freedom. It's very similar, where if you have awareness and you have structure and you have clarity about how to navigate in a space, then you feel a lot more at ease. So if anyone's looking to create safety for their partner, I think first and foremost is communication and having conversations and asking questions like, hey, let's just say you're bringing up the topic with a partner. Hey, I am following so-and-so and they're talking about this. Curious, have you ever thought about this? Is this of interest to you? Is this something that you are interested in talking about with me? And that's like a great way to gauge how someone feels and if someone's interested, or like what their experiences have been in the past, or what their level of curiosity is, or what their traumas are. Like that's going to open up a whole can of worms. So I think being curious about what other people want and need and feel, what their history is in relationships, what their history is with certain dynamics, and just getting curious about other people and finding ways to build structure, protocols, clarity, and being able to like initiate those conversations, I think is really powerful. And I think that's like one of the biggest things to start off with is being curious about your other person, and then being able to have like hypothetical conversations about wants, needs, interest with even just with your own relationship, but especially if you're going to be seeing other people, and then being able to have the evidence that those protocols and those structures can be followed as much as possible.
What are the protocols? What are some like how does one maintain such a dynamic? It sounds, I don't know that I have the maturity and like the wholeness within myself to be okay with such a situation. I think I can imagine it being very heinous for me.
Okay.
Like it'd be very challenging.
How come?
Just jealousy, insecurity, fear.
Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah.
You would not feel super safe.
Oh no.
Right.
No, I'd be a wreck.
Yeah, totally.
I could feel my wrist contracting.
Yes.
See my hands wide open? It's like that.
Right.
My hands spread wide open right now in contraction.
Right. And you know,
what is that? Is that like what is that, nature or nurture? Do you think there's such a thing as a person that is objectively polyamorous versus monogamous versus something else? Is it like gay, straight, trans?
I think there are definitely people that it's more of a nature than it is a nurture thing. Like I absolutely believe that the relational orientation spectrum is similar to the sexual identity orientation spectrum in the way that there are people that are more naturally polyamorous and like designed that way.
Who are those people?
My husband's one of them for sure. He's been having threesomes since he was in high school, and then he's like, I've always had, yeah. He told me these great stories. He had like a very sex positive sexual education in his high school. I'm like, that's so interesting. His parents were very sex positive, so there was a lot of kind of like progressiveness from the beginning. And I wasn't one of those people for sure. I didn't even know it existed or that it was okay. And over time, when I met him, he was already openly polyamorous on the internet, so I knew what it was. And then we got together, and I was like, I number one, first and foremost, I've always been a very open-minded person, and I've always like been curious and wanted to explore things, but I didn't have like tons of self-awareness in that area, and I didn't know what was going to make me feel insecure and jealous. I also have very good relationships with men in my life growing up, like my dad, my grandparents, my uncles, all incredible, safe men. So I have very like positive belief systems, and like I have a strong sense of safety in like relationships with men in general. And I also don't have much betrayal in my past in terms of like friendship or relationship betrayal. So I didn't have like deeper traumas coming into the relationship that would have been like polyamory or even dating other people or non-monogamy would have been like over the top. I think that for many, many people, it's so over the top that it's just like, I can't even consider going near that. Never mind like multiple things. Like I think that there's so many different elements that can really make it feel over the top for so many people, because it hits on some of our basic like core needs as you know, not being abandoned, and relationships bring up so much stuff about our family traumas and our mom stuff and our dad stuff. And that's a lot of the inner work that we do in any kind of romantic relationship. So being able to add more people to that is just kind of like doing that on steroids. It's like, you know, fucking double, triple, quadruple that experience. So I do think that there's definitely people that are like more naturally that way. I think that there are people that choose to live that way and don't necessarily have to. I think that there's lots of different ways.
What's the protocol? If you're, you know.
Oh yeah, you asked about protocols.
Yeah.
What is a protocol?
If you're dyad guy or gal, it's how you rolled. But you're like, maybe we'll try out this poly terrain. Like what do you need?
You need lots of things. I think first and foremost, something that you can look at.
Say a rain jacket.
Yes.
That was.
John and I have a program called How to Say the Hard Things. Okay. It's we talk about relationship agreements and protocols. So a protocol is basically like a step-by-step process that you agree to follow when you're getting into like more emotionally tricky spaces. So even, for example, like dyad relationships can have protocols. Like, okay, what does it look like when you go out? Like, you text me when you're on your way home. Like, you text me when you're, safely at home. Like, that's just a protocol that we follow. Or like, what's the protocol if someone slides into your DMs? Like, do you tell your partner about it immediately, or do you just not? And like, is that something you agree upon? Like, over time, people build these protocols of, if this happens once, here's where it went wrong, and here's how we can prevent that wrong thing from happening again, with a protocol and like a system of actions that we both agree to, basically. So if someone's opening up, you're going to need protocols for multiple different things. Number one, do you do dating apps? What does that look like? How quickly do you tell someone, when you're interested in someone? John and I have this protocol where we have this like flirting rating scale, basically. And we talked about like, at what point do we tell each other that we've flirted with someone, or like something is escalated to the point where we need to communicate with each other that it's happening.
What's your guys' protocol?
We have this like 0 through 5. Like if it's like a 1, we don't need to tell each other. I think we tell each other at like a 3.
What's a 3 look like?
A 3 is
third base.
A third base. A 3 is like, so I think a 2 is like fire emojis and like probably not going to ever talk to this person in real life. Maybe you send hard eyes or something, but like it's nothing.
3
is like
eggplant.
Eggplant. I think 3 is like escalated to a point of expressed direct interest, or it's been enough kind of back and forth of like, I'm pretty sure this person's interested, but they haven't directly told me and I haven't directly told them, but it's gotten to the point where that's happening. Because we have an open relationship, that's allowed. That's not allowed for most relationships. For most relationships, like number 1 is a no. All right, of like, if you hard eyes with anybody on Instagram or whatever, like that's a no for our monogamous relationship. We have availability of, all the way up until dating other people and like romantically being in relationships with other people. So we just figure out like, okay, for the flirting portion, what is our protocol for like when we talk about when we need to start bringing that to each other?
Seems dangerous, more dangerous from a male's experience to enter into a polyamorous dynamic, as far as like the fear of like, oh, the opposite partner is going to find somebody else and they're going to, it's going to be new and exciting. And
why is that more for men?
Well, this is certainly not an absolute, but
right.
I would think, at least in my experience with myself and like talking to dudes that I know, a guy, generally speaking, is more interested, and please correct me, in just like sexuality, where it's just like, oh, she's hot, like that's awesome. Whereas a girl needs more emotional safety and like more of like, actually like, oh, I like the essence of this person and like the energy of this person, and they make me feel a certain way, and that to me, like the depth of that sounds terrifying.
Right.
If I were to be like, oh yeah, like, well, I know the things that you need to feel safe to enter into something like that. So therefore, like, you would need to almost cultivate like a real relationship, not as an absolute for all women,
right?
But generally speaking, it's just as like a safety thing. Like, men are big and, bigger and stronger and more dangerous than women.
Right.
So they can kind of
totally,
engage in that, like, oh, it's just sex. Whereas a woman's like, oh, no. We got to build up this whole thing of safety to get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely like, that's probably a majority. And then there's definitely outliers in both directions or whatever.
Sure.
Like there's plenty of like openly and shamelessly super slutty women that are just like, yeah, I just want to fuck someone. Like that's fine. And there's, I also think that there's I forget what the first one's called. I know there's like certain types of turn on. Like there's like a reactive one, or like there's 2 types. Like one is like you can just feel turned on randomly. And then one is like it builds up based on, having kind of like a lead up experience. Like one's more reactive, and women have the more maybe responsive, I think it's called. But yeah, that totally makes sense. And that kind of tracks with my personal experience. Like I'm more what they call, there's a term for it, demisexual, which is I usually need like an emotional or mental kind of interest in a person before I'm interested in them sexually.
Yeah.
And that usually looks like less frequent relationships, but more depth. And for John, my partner, he's a depthful person as well, and he's available to that, but he doesn't need as much like immediate emotional or romantic interest in order to enter into a sexual relationship with someone. So he tends to have more frequency and I have more depth, which has like just different textures. So there's definitely a lot to say for like what it's like to navigate more frequency versus more depth. Like the emotional stuff is more tricky, requires a lot more, you know, depending on your relationship to sex as well. Like that could be also really challenging and really difficult. Like there's many layers to kind of both things of the relational, romantic, emotional space and the sexual space. Like there's so many layers to both of those. But yeah, you're right.
What differentiates a girl that is more open sexually and more like slutty, to use that language, which doesn't sound appropriate? It doesn't sound good me saying that.
No, it's a way that women are reclaiming their relationship to their sexuality.
Slut now. Yeah, I can say slut.
Oh yeah.
Okay, slutty.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah. If women are calling themselves that,
very tiptoey.
There are plenty of women that I know that are like very happy to call themselves a slut, and you can use it endearingly now. I think there's a change. But if you're using it as like a degrading, like you know, sex shamey way, like slut shaming, then it's a no. Oh, like, okay. Oh, you're a slut. Like you've been run through. You're not a valuable woman anymore. Like that's a no.
Okay, we don't do that.
All right,
thank you for that.
Yes. But if it's like, oh, you're a slut, that's great.
Yeah, what's like the personality characteristics or the constitution of a gal who identifies as slut? Is there some type of like, what's the background of this person compared to a girl that's more like, no, like I'm more energy person. What do you call it? Demisexual?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
I don't know.
What are the characteristics of that person? What's the childhood of that person? Would there be sexual trauma perhaps involved in one compared to the other? Perhaps some like reclaiming of sexuality?
I think there's so many reasons to reclaim your sexuality. I think that it's probably a combination of like sex drive and comfortability with your own sexuality. I don't know. I don't think that there's any one kind of like this is their trauma, so they're a more sexual person thing. Like I think that is kind of like pathologizing someone's experience of themselves, and there's so much more to people's sexuality than, you know, what they've been through as a kid and how that like manifests and expresses itself as an adult.
Yeah.
You know, I know so many people that are like they are very sexually expressed in like that part of their lives, and it's kind of like the way that I relate to it is like what makes someone like super healthy and like they really care about health, and health is a priority and a value to them, and like that's like a pathway that they prioritize in their life versus someone that prioritizes sex and sexuality and like that experience versus someone that prioritizes business and money and like, you know, success in that arena. Yeah. I think that everybody has their kind of core top things that they prioritize the most, and sometimes it's just nature. It's just like how you are. What
are some of the main, and we'll come off of this this as well, but what are some of the main stumbling blocks that you've experienced yourself in your forays into polyamory that you would anticipate with a monogamous couple kind of experimenting into those waters? What are some of the main stumbling blocks?
I think the biggest stumbling blocks are like your blind spots and your shadows, which are really hard because you don't know what they are until you go into them. I think sometimes people go too quickly. I've gone too quickly in the past as well of just, you know, you don't know how you're going to feel once those doors open up. And I think if you don't do enough kind of groundwork within yourself, it can be really stumbly and tricky. So I think if you've done therapy, if you've worked on yourself a lot, if you have a lot of awareness of, you know, yourself as a sexual person, what you want, what you need, if you have a lot of awareness of your patterns and your like personal struggles and relationships, I think it can be really helpful to minimize a lot of the stumbling blocks that you might have when you open up. Because really what opening up does is it just illuminates all the stuff that's already there that you haven't worked on, but it makes it riskier, essentially. Like the emotional risk is higher because you're potentially getting into a situation where, you know, you hurt someone so bad because something happen that they didn't want to happen or didn't expect to happen, or you acted in a certain way that you didn't talk about and like it was a big boundary for somebody, because it's basically like there's these little landmines. So I think reading polyamory books is really helpful. Consuming as much content as you can, asking people with experience is really helpful, and just like really setting yourself up for as much success as you can. And the other biggest kind of like tip that I have is have sit down conversations where you hypothesize potential scenarios.
It's very stoic.
Yes. And it's really helpful because you don't know how something's going to go. And that often is what creates the most anxiety, is the unknown of like, I don't know how it's going to go. And especially if it's, you know, with yourself or with someone else, we have plenty of parts of ourselves that we don't totally trust. Like you were talking about, you were like, I don't know how I would feel. Like I would, you know, it would be a lot for me. So if you don't know how someone else is going to behave in a certain situation, that's a big unknown. Like you don't know their patterns. You don't know their kind of unconscious stuff. Even if you do, it's just like sometimes people have unconscious stuff that you don't know what it's going to be, and it might hurt you. It might be difficult. You also don't know how our people are going to react if there's a conflict. And that is very often what happens after the fact of like, now we're in a conflict or there's a challenge. How do we show up for each other emotionally? So I think if you can hypothesize like, all right, if I get really triggered and upset, if something like this happens, how would you react? Or like, how would we support each other through that? And having that clarity, I think, is going to really support the like opening up process as much as possible. You can't hypothesize everything. Like theory is just theory until you get into action and actual implementation, and then you start to feel the real feelings that come up and navigate like, how am I showing up in this space? But if you can theorize as much as possible and like create certainty in a lot of the areas that feel uncertain, it's really helpful.
How does a partner curate or cultivate an environment within a relationship that makes the other partner feel safe to be authentic and be honest?
Great question. Compassion is number one. Empathy, validating their experience, and really being an active listener when they have feelings. One of my favorite ways that my partner helps me feel authentic is he encourages me to share more. So if I share something, it's just like, tell me more. Like, what else is here? Like, is there anything else that you need to be able to express yourself authentically? And being able to like encourage that expression is really helpful. Being able to like praise your partner when they do share and remind them that it's safe to share. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate your share is always really helpful.
What if it hurts?
Well, you navigate, that's probably going to happen. So yes, all of those things are helpful. Like not everything is going to be like, oh, thanks for sharing that. Like you want to fuck someone else. And like, I feel really upset about that. And that's not always going to be how the process goes. Like that's a helpful thing to add. And if you're the sharer of information and you're anticipating hurt happening, it's really helpful to make as many disclaimers as possible to help someone disarm their guarded self. So number one, I want to talk about this, but I don't need to take action about it. Are you available for that? Is a really helpful way to start a conversation. Helps disarm someone. Like, okay, we don't have to act on this right now. Like, you just want to talk about it. Okay.
Yeah, finality feels heartless.
Right. Absolutes
like,
can be really intense. So
okay,
like,
I'm not really involved in this. I thought we were a team.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Right.
This is final. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
Or just the energy of that. Of like,
Right.
no, like my authenticity is this is what I will do. It's just like, ugh.
Oh my God. I
It's
was
like a razor
watching,
blade.
I love shows. I was watching Too Hot to Handle, the reality show yesterday. They're so funny to watch because they're very immature. They're like 21 years old. And this guy was like, I'm going to go sleep in the bed with this other girl instead. I'll talk to you about it tomorrow. And like he was sleeping in bed with one girl, and then he literally whispered to her and slept in bed next to this other girl. And I was just like, the very, very final and heartless and like unempathetic.
Yeah.
And just like, this is just what I'm doing. And like, you know, people, when you're trying to share something that's authentic, it very often your fight, flight, fawn, and freeze responses are going to come up. Your nervous system is usually going to find a way to protect you. And that's what I mean about you don't know how someone's going to be when they're in an emotionally tricky situation. Even the person that is like the sharer or the one that wants something, even yourself, if you're the one that wants something, you don't know how you're going to show up. Like for me, people please and minimize what I want. That would be more of my strategy. And it would be really difficult to ultimately like say the thing that was the most true because I would be so terrified to hurt my partner. And that was my strategy for a long time. And once I got over that hump, I was like, okay, now I'm like in the place of sharing. Like, how can I communicate what I need to communicate and not do it hastily, and like, you know, being able to express that energy and get it out and feel safe within myself to be able to do that. And it takes a lot of time to get your body and your nervous system on board with communicating these things.
Yeah, it's like softening yourself to be able to hold compassion. You know, if you're hardened, things will probably naturally just come out in a more
and then
right angle.
Even circling back to shame, if you have shame, usually, you know, the shame is so insidious and such like one of these little energies that just does not want to be seen. So even if you're a very self-aware person, and if you have shame living in your shadow, like I've had shame and living in my shadow, it does all of these different things to not come up. So it will usually have a strategy. So even if you're sharing, you might have a blind spot, you might not be fully ready to say certain things, and you might not even know that you have certain things to say and to share. So it's a process to finally find ways to get all that stuff to come out. And, you know, you're navigating not just yourself, but another person. Like very often there will be a reaction, there will be an emotion, and that's allowed and okay too. And the work to do in that space is really also about like, okay, like let me find emotional regulation within myself. Let me communicate what is challenging for me about this. Let me work on controlling my behavior when I'm in a certain emotion. Like we all have challenging and negative behaviors if we're really angry or if we're really scared. Sometimes we'll say things that we don't mean, or sometimes we'll raise our voice, or sometimes we'll just say something hurtful. And we are all responsible for how we show up in our emotions. So that's a whole other little side quest journey.
So, all right. So we're having a microscopic truth share.
Yes.
Having a moment. Opposite partner is feeling reactionary.
Mm-hmm.
Old traumas, in quotations or what have yous, coming to the surface. They're like regressing back to that time that something terrible happened X amount of years ago. Eyes shift. They're in a place where it's like, oh boy, like information is different. Like it's like we're in a storm.
Yeah.
How do we navigate that conversation? Skillfully.
Skillfully. First and foremost, it's being able to recognize what you're experiencing. It's often really difficult to recognize when you're in a storm.
For both parties, by the way.
Yeah, for both people.
How do we navigate it? Person presenting information, person receiving, going into place, ready to choke somebody.
Yeah. You know, it's a really great protocol to have in place in any relationship, that you're typically ideally focusing on the problem or the issues or the challenges that you're both having, and you're on the same team versus being on opposing teams. That can be a really helpful just principle to install so you can grab onto it when you're in a really difficult place. But ideally, both people are interested in and choose to find a way to regulate themselves enough to have a conversation about what's really happening. So it's like usually the emotional reactions begin, and then one or both parties recognize that it's not just about the thing that we originally spoke about. It's probably some other emotions from the past that are getting dredged up in this conversation that we need to address as well.
Yeah.
So whoever has the most awareness at the time ideally either calls that out to communicate about it, or finds a way to, you know, calm themselves down enough to find a way to get to like the deeper points that are happening.
Yeah.
Something that I really try to do as much as possible is communicate about what I'm experiencing, even if I'm really intense in an emotion. So what I mean by that is if I'm feeling really angry, for example, I'll say, my anger really wants to like throw a shoe at the wall right now. And instead of saying the thing that I feel like what I want to say, like my anger wants to say this really petty thing or this really mean thing or whatever, I will communicate that my anger wants to do this, but I'm aware enough to know that like my anger is essentially creating this whole other version of me. Like when we're really in our nervous system dysregulation, we want different things than when we're regulated. Like if you've ever had a conversation where you're really regulated, you can have the thoughtfulness and the mindfulness and the cognitive thinking and the critical thinking enough to be considerate and slow down enough to.
It's almost like another personality. It's like
it really is.
It's like a security guard comes out.
Yes.
It's like, oh shit,
Yeah,
Hank with the bat and the barbed wire around it is like, this is just Hank. Like,
yeah, like that's who you're talking to at that point.
We're talking about Hank.
Your security guard is Hank, apparently. Mine is Janice.
Exactly.
That's her name.
Yeah.
What's
Janice like?
She is very people pleasery. And
you go the other direction.
Yeah.
Oh,
so I have Janice. She's people
soft.
pleaser. And then I haven't named my anger, but she's someone else.
What's she like?
Oh, she can be pretty intense.
Oh boy.
So I grew up as a people pleaser, and for most of my life until I was about 25, I identified as a person that never got angry, which is like really hilarious because we all get angry, and like that was just my way of repressing my anger and like not identifying as a person that had anger. Yeah. But ultimately I had it. It just was hidden. And I also just didn't have any skills on how to interact with it. So sometimes the anger has gotten like very high. The way that I like to navigate the anger now is I like to take my car keys, go in my car, drive a little bit. I'll do 3 blood-curdling screams.
Nice.
It's so great.
I thought you were going to say key your boyfriend's car. I'm like,
no.
Yeah. Let's go.
No, nothing destructive to myself or other people. A little bit to my vocal cords, but that's about it.
Okay.
Yes.
How's the scream work out for you? Is this advisable to other folks?
It's not harmful to anybody except for your vocal cords. So I think it's a really helpful practice, whether it's a pillow or being in the car. I think, again, that conversation about getting the energy up and out, whenever I notice it now, I try to not communicate from that place as much as possible because I know that whatever that version of me is thinking and feeling is not what my true self really would like to behave as. Mm-hmm. So I try to get that energy out in whatever way I possibly can. And the screaming has been a really good tool for me.
I think physicality is one of the best tools.
Yes.
And physical, like I'm like a very kinesthetic guy, which might be obvious. And so I find touch to be very valuable. Like I feel like you can convey
100%.
a trillion words with, maybe not a trillion, might be a little bit much, but a lot of words. And but in a much more sincere, authentic, like invisible way, like an intrinsic way. Whereas if you're already in like debate mode, and like opponent processing, or like, okay, we're trying to win this thing with our words and our minds. To me, I experience very little benefit from that. Like it feels like there's a moment where it's like, oh, the words they're not happening.
Right.
Like words are not a thing anymore. Like I can't explain my way through this anymore.
Yeah.
But
so you get into the body.
But physical touch, whether it's like just holding each other.
Yeah.
I think that can be a really beautiful thing.
Like
it's like coming back, like we're on the same team.
Yeah.
I'm on your team.
Yeah.
Like I know
that's a helpful
I know
one.
they're pissed, but like I'm on your team.
Yeah.
And actually having that and then maybe attuning to each other's breath and maybe as a team finding maybe a slower breath or a longer exhalation.
Yeah.
Maybe like softening your vision.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, let's like attune. And now suddenly, as opposed to seeing this opponent, you're actually physically attuned to this being that's now more like you than they were a second ago because you've actually physically attuned to each other.
Yeah. It's like turning towards each other instead of your protectors want to turn away from each other.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really helpful.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
This is the last thing. What, from your perspective, is the personal developmental value of sexuality?
So much. I feel like sexuality is kind of the final frontier of how you are as a person. And I never used to believe that. Like, there's so much there. Like, it's just such a raw version of the self that is, experienced either solo or with another person or with other people. And it's such a raw, vulnerable experience to be in your sexuality. And I know for myself anyway, whenever I'm in that space, like it represents the layers of openness that I feel and safety that I feel, and my emotions come into play and my body reacts a certain way depending on how I'm feeling in my life, whether it's about myself or about my relationship. So when I say, sexuality and like your relationship to that part of you is kind of like the final frontier of how are you really? I think it really represents like when you can be free and relaxed and open in that space, it means you're connected to yourself, you're connected to pleasure, which is really a great representation of how connected you feel to your own sense of safety and your own sense of ability to be open and receive pleasure.
Yeah. Do you deserve pleasure without the attachment of shame?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's like such a valuable thing to explore that space within yourself, because it really, it can teach you so many things about, who you are as a person, like so many things about, God, your relationship to your wounds and your past, and so much can be transformed in that space as well. Like if it's done correctly and there's, safety involved and people are interested in exploring who they are in that space and like what shows up for them. And there's various ways to navigate things like Tantra or, various different styles like BDSM. And there's so many things that people explore in that space within themselves. And so much of it is self-development work. It's just like representative of so many different things.
I appreciate that you embrace saying Tantra like you're from the Midwest.
Oh, yes. Tantra.
It's the worst. When you're like,
I'm an American.
Yeah. When you suddenly like spiritualize a word, you're like talking normal,
like yoga,
basic bitch English, and then suddenly,
yes, like chai tea.
Chakra. Like, come on, bro. Just fucking chakra. Just whatever.
Yeah. Just say it like an American.
Tantra.
Yeah.
Doing a little tantra.
Yes.
I appreciate you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I really value what you create in the book, Followed, because I see it as it's like a, how do you call it? Like a psycho-emotional spiritual guide to more effective communication in both IRL and within the internets, which is such a massive part of people's lives.
Yeah.
And so in this conversation, we, went into more like kind of deeper bits and things that I have a particular interest in with that. But all of that, the basis of all that we talked about also is outlined in there, not the poly stuff specifically, but the communication aspect. Yeah. So I really appreciate you creating such a powerful resource for people.
Thank you.
And you're just living your life in such a way to be able to present this information in such an authentic, compassionate, sincere way. It's very beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we ought to say before we wrap this piece up?
Well, I think we got into shame and polyamory and authentic expression and sexuality. So I think we
went hard.
Covered some cool stuff.
Went hard in the paint.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Appreciate you. That is it. That is all. I'll see you guys next week. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. If you did, feel free to tag myself at Align Podcast or Amanda at Amanda Bucci on the Instagram. Tag a clip from this that you enjoyed. I love seeing those guys, and also am a fan of reposting the ones, particularly when it's an actual clip. If you give me something to repost that's an audio bite or something of the sort, that's always great because it also tells me/us the parts that you enjoyed. Thank you for doing you. Thanks for subscribing. Check out the Align Podcast YouTube page so you can get instructional content that comes out weekly, as well as clips from this program. That's it. That's all. Big hugs. I'll see you next week.